And we are live. Good evening, everybody. This is Brendan Baylod from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Research Group. I'd like to welcome everybody to Great Lakes Shipwrecks Live. We have a heck of an episode for you tonight. I'm going to give it some time for some people to start joining. I'd like to remind everybody that we are live, and we would encourage you to chat if you want to make some comments over there on the sidebar to let us know that you are, in fact, hearing us. It is always appreciated. So I've not been doing the show every week anymore like I did last year. I've been doing it sort of every other ish. A couple of reasons for that. Primarily because it's difficult to get guests. So if anybody wants to appear on the show, if you've got any thing particularly interesting or even not interesting, and you're just interested in being on the show, give me a holler. I'd be happy to entertain having some additional guests. All right. Got a couple of people starting to join and comment. Excellent. Trinidad, California. Holy smokes. Welcome. So, a couple of other things. I want to remind everybody that next week we have a guest again, right away, a week later. Kim Stabelfeld is reprising his appearance when his computer crashed on him 2 weeks ago. And so we will have the legendary Milwaukee dive guide author, underwater archaeology guy. I mean, just all around, very active guy for many, many years in Great Lakes maritime history and scuba diving, Kim Stabelfeld. Very happy to have him on the show. Kim and I go way back and have done a lot of things together, not the least of which was being some of the founders of Milwaukee's Ghost Ships Festival. So, all right. A couple other things I want to remind everybody of. We have a Zoom room tonight. So those of you who haven't had a chance to talk to another human being who have been holed up in your houses due to the plague, come on and join us. I've got the link posted on the group. We're going to take a 20-minute break for potty and beer. So come on back at 20 after, and we will enjoy our Zoom room. And you'll get to meet our guests. So, without further ado, we have two special guests tonight, and I alluded to this on the last show we had, that we might have a special announcement tonight on this show about new discoveries. So my guests tonight are not people that necessarily everyone here is going to know. There are a lot of guys like them on the Great Lakes who have been there for 30, 40 years, diving wrecks, looking for wrecks, but they're not out there in the spotlight. They're not the guys you're going to see on the History Channel, but they're guys that have done some serious work over many, many years on the Great Lakes. And they are here tonight to share their long experience with not just diving and wreck hunting, but also two new discoveries. So I'm really, really privileged tonight to have Mark Gammage and Joe Vanwagnen on the show. Welcome, guys.
How you doing, Brandon?
Doing good. So, guys, it is, obviously exciting, that, we've got some big news tonight. But I first want to talk a little bit about you fellas. You're kind of an interesting pair because I've heard your names before, and I know you were involved in finding the Osborne up at Whitefish years ago in the 80s. And, I'd heard your names before, but I really didn't know much about you. And when you contacted me and I started to get to know you, it turned out that we have a lot in common and we know a lot of the same people and have a lot of the same interests. And I'm always, kind of interested to hear about how people got started in this thing, particularly back in the day when there weren't that many people doing it. So why don't you guys take a few minutes and tell us a little bit about yourselves, your background, how'd you get into diving, and what made you want to go looking for shipwrecks on the bottom of the Great Lakes?
Well, I think you can say it in a word, adventure. Joe and I think that's something that's common to both of us. It kind of drew us together is, the desire to go out and explore and have adventure. And what more adventure could you have than going to look for shipwrecks? So we both started about the same time. I think we were both certified at 17. Started diving, eventually got into shipwrecks. And that was just for a time frame. That was roughly, what, Joe? That was mid 70s. We started diving shipwrecks, roughly.
I got certified in 73, and we did 2 charters that in 74, one to Tobermory and one to Thunder Bay, and that's how we got hooked on shipwrecks, was those trips. And that's where I met Mark, and also there was about a dozen other people from Lansing that were real interested in shipwreck diving back then. We all became friends. At the end of that year, I could see the writing on the wall that you had to have a boat if you were going to do much diving on wrecks. So I was just starting in college that year, and the next year I showed up at Thunder Bay with a 16-foot fiberglass boat, thinking I was going to go out and dive. I thought, well, if I could just make this boat last till I get out of college, then I might be able to afford one. So I put my dive gear in this 16-foot boat, headed out of the harbor, went over the first wave and dove right into the second wave, and took green water right over the windshield.
Oh boy.
I turned it around, put it back on shore, put it back on the trailer, because there was no way I was going to go diving. And I looked over on the side, and up on stilts was this boat, the Lisa Ann. George Dunkelberg and Rose Armstrong had just bought it. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? My diving's done for the weekend. So I got to chatting with George, and we became friends. And I said, hey, George, I'll be happy to help you guys get your boat ready if you'll let me dive with you this year. So we got that boat in the lake. In the process of doing that, Dick Race was diving in the area at the time. We got to meet him and spend time with him. And this was all in the time before Loran Sea. So if you had to know how to find these wrecks with shore bearings and bottom contours, or you weren't going to find them. So the one that really amazed me, Dick Race told us how to find the Monrovia. And if you know much about the Monrovia, it's about over 20 miles offshore. You can't see any shore features at all. And Dick said, well, hey, no problem. He says, leave the harbor, you head on this bearing, you'll go across the deep section, and when you start back up into the rise out there, you go to a certain depth, turn left, and stay on that contour. And sure enough, you ran right over the Monrovia, which is it's one of my favorite wrecks that we dove up there. But that was always amazing to me that we could find that. Mark was diving with us that summer too, but eventually it came clear that the wrecks at Mackinac were a lot closer to shore, and it was easier to find them with land bearings. So at the end of that season, George and Rose decided to move the boat to Mackinac, and everybody pretty much followed up there. We started diving Mackinac, diving with Chuck and Jerry Feltner when they were finding all of their wrecks up there. But at that point, we really started getting interested in Whitefish Point. We started making trips up there, but the crystal clear water and the perfectly preserved wrecks, we got hooked. And I know Mark was working in Minneapolis at the time. How long was that trip, Mark? About 9 hours to get up there?
Yeah, I remember driving over through Wisconsin, 9 hours, just for a weekend. Especially because that's when we really started getting heavier into looking for shipwrecks. And we had a group of us at that time, since we weren't really identifying ourselves as individuals, as more of a group, we coined the name Odyssey Foundation, which was actually named after one of the guy's boats. so that's probably why maybe some people haven't heard our names. But we had a couple wrecks up there that we found. Joe and Mike researched and found the John M. Osborne, which was the most significant one. And I researched and found the Miztech. And so we spent a lot of time up there talking to Tom Farnquist before he ever had the museum. I remember sitting in one of the buildings on an old torn up couch, listening to him talk about this idea of starting a museum. And you can see where it is now if you've ever been there. It's incredibly impressive. So that was really a good time. I mean, that's when we really started getting into the searching, the researching, instead of just diving known wrecks.
So, guys, I got to ask, is that a Westmar I see in this picture, Joe?
Yeah, but on the very left, that's a Westmar side scan, the old dry paper model. I had that one at first, and eventually, I think it was after I found the Osborne, I bought the video version of that used a computer screen. But to be honest, that Westmar sonar left a lot to be desired. You could find things with it, but it's not as easy as it is now.
No, I bet not. I
by that time the Loran was out, and at least we could run Loran grids at that point, and that's when we really started searching.
So this is an interesting shot.
There we go.
Tell us a little bit about some of these folks.
Yeah, so if you go from the right to the left, that's me. Joe's leaning on the swim platform there behind Deep Quest, and to his right is Mike Hughes, and then Gary Schumbarger and Tom Farnquist, Larry and Lisa Johnson, Thad and Patty Vance. And then the middle there on the next boat is Dave DeNike, his son, Chad, and another friend of ours, Al Rao. So as you can see, there was kind of a group of people that kind of hung out and did things together and had a lot of fun.
Very cool. And you all were out there kind of diving at Whitefish.
There was about 10 boats in that group.
Wow. And so this is you guys also out there?
That's my first boat. I actually bought that in Minneapolis. Had a fiberglass hull and a wood deck and cabin. I had to totally rebuild that at one point. But it got me out there. I had a lot of fun with that boat. But I've had two more since then. I'm a lot more comfortable now than I was in that boat. I can guarantee you that.
So tell us a little bit about the Deep Quest. This is kind of one of the boats that you did a lot of the searching with, or at least diving off of up in the Straits and Alpena.
Brendan, that was my first boat. It was a 1955 Owens. I learned an awful lot about woodworking having that boat, because anybody that's owned a wooden boat probably only do it once.
Yeah.
I put almost 9,000 miles on that boat in the course of diving over the years, and eventually got married and had kids. And at that point, the boat was too small, and I ended up giving it to my brother.
It's interesting. I just spent some time on I think was a 48 Owens. Ken Merriman's boat. The Hey Boy is a big wooden Owens. He's had it since I think about 1970. He told me that he's replaced every single board on the hull, the whole transom, the decks.
We've done the same. That teaches you a lot about woodworking for sure.
They obviously attract wreck hunters. Owens, the big old wooden Owens boats. So, so tell us a little bit about your work up at Whitefish, and how did you guys? What made you want to find wrecks up there? And can you tell us a little bit about how you found the Osborne and the Miztech?
Go ahead, Phil. Start out on the Osborne.
In 1983, in the winter, there were about 6 out of the group that spent quite a bit of time at the State of Michigan Library. Now, back in those days, the only way to get information out is you had to pull the microfilm reels. So there were 3 or 4 of us that bought microfilm readers. We'd take them home, and we'd take all the local papers from around that area up there and catalog all the marine news that might be of interest to us. And one of the things that we ran across was the wreck of the John B. Osborne. It was heading towards the Sioux, towing 3 schooner barges that are pictured in that painting. He was heading downbound towards the Sioux on a foggy day, and the Canadian mail ship Alberta came barreling out of the fog and smacked into it on its starboard side and knocked the boiler off the mount. They left 3 people were scalded to death. And then they backed the Alberta out. They cut the tow hawser. We know that because it's still laying on the bottom down there. And down she went. In talking, we talked to both Dick Race and John Steele. We knew that both of them had hunted for that. And when we came across a chart in the State of the Michigan Library that showed the downbound steamer lane farther north in the lake than it's shown presently. And there was a very good chance that they were looking in the wrong spot. So Mike Hughes and I, we put all the data together, put an X on the map, went out and set up a Loran grid, and went out one Saturday morning, it was flat calm, and started searching. And 5 hours into the search, we ran right over it. So we decided at that point to do something different. We didn't dive it. We waited until the next weekend, and we called everybody in the group and invited them to be along on the Virgin dive.
Oh, very cool.
So, and it was a neat thing to do, man. There was a whole bunch of people out there. Everybody was excited. Nobody had ever seen it before. So here I had that big video camera getting ready to go down the line, and all these slobs took off towards the bottom and left me. I did get some good video on it, but it's a really neat wreck. It was fun to find. We spent the next 2.5 years exploring that without taking a thing. It was okay to uncover things, but you left it where it laid. And this was right back in the beginning of when the mindset was changing, and it was now illegal to take things. So we kept that quiet for 2.5 years, and eventually the numbers got out and the things started to show up missing. There was a silver pocket watch laying down below the deck by a real nice old cook stove. That went away. So eventually the guys at the marina applied for a permit to salvage some of the stuff for the museum. Really, at that point, we were done with it. We were on to other things. Got married around that time, started having kids, and we started spending a lot more time exploring the lakes and not just diving. So we kind of got away from it. That's my underwater camera housing that I built in 1980. It weighed 65 pounds in air, and that was really at the beginning of video cameras. It's when the video cameras was separate from the recorder. And what I did is I sent that video signal back to the boat and recorded it up there. And it's a 110 volt billboard flood that I was using for lighting at the time. But it worked good. A lot easier to handle in the water than on shore.
Well, it also had underwater communication, Joe, because like there was one time I was up top and we were doing the recording, and of course you got to tend the line and everything, and you may have noticed Joe had a Cressy sub mask on, full face mask. So since the camera has a microphone on it, if he needed more cable, he just go, you know, let more cable out, and you could actually hear it up in the TV. So we'd let out a little more cable. So that was our early underwater communication system.
So
We
did you guys
experimented with all kinds of crazy.
and you built these
Pardon
lights. You built this light system. I also that's in this picture.
Yeah, Mike did. Mike, those are actually PVC plumbing tees with halogen bulbs in them, and then he's got a battery pack which you can't see on his belt, and a hockey helmet. You know, so you know, necessity is the mother of invention, and so we just tried to make what we needed because some of that stuff didn't exist back then, or it was too expensive to buy.
You wanted your hands free, and having helmet lights that freed up your hands. Another thing, couple other things we were doing, we got to talking and just, you know, just discussed the fact that we're hauling lead in our weight belts. Why don't we haul flooded batteries? So we started hauling batteries instead of weight belts. Right, you just see the blue batteries around my waist. And I used those for the helmet lights. And I also put a tank scooter on the back of those duals. I mounted a trolling motor up there to help shove me through the water. That didn't work so hot, but we were always game to try new things.
Clearly. So, you know, it sounds like, you know, there was a lot of new technology. I spotted that Cooper hockey helmet right away because I'm a hockey player. I got a big kick out of that. You guys really made some significant innovations, it sounds like, when you were diving up there at Whitefish. So, Mark, I know we didn't talk about it before, but we do have some extra time. Can you tell me a little bit about the, you know, not so much the details, but do you remember much about the Miztech Discovery?
Yeah, definitely. I was up there. This was, I think, in 1984. I think it was the same year you found the Osborne, Joe. But we went out. Yeah, I was able to find some information that actually pinpointed the wreck because the Corps of Engineers had gone out. It was a tow of the Myron. It was a schooner barge, went down in a storm. The tow line broke and they never saw it again. I think a day or two later, they spotted some spars on the surface and they marked the wreck and they published that location by triangulation from Whitefish Point, Vermilion Point, and Crisp Point. And so I plotted it on the chart, and I think it was Thad Vance and George Dunkelberg and Dave DeNike and I went out. And so George and I had the Westmar side scan. We were going to go over and tune it up on the wreck of the Drake and then come back and start the pattern. We had that all laid out. So Thad and Dave took their boats and just started running around. They ran over the wreck. It was only 800 feet from the mark that I put on the chart. That's how good that triangulation worked.
Wow.
So we came back and they're hooking this wreck and I'm going, hey, what are you guys doing? They're going, well, we got a spike, you know, we're checking it out. And so I couldn't get my gear on fast enough. Those guys beat me down to the wreck. And just as I was ready to get in, they came up and I said, well, what'd you find? They said, oh, nothing, just a virgin shipwreck. And so that was really exciting. That was a lot of fun. To be able to find that. And, you know, there's an incredible stories, you know, Brendan, around the Myron, the Miztech, the Zilla, all, you know, they all had, I think, Captain O'Neill involved in all that. So that was a really cool story around that as well.
Very neat. So I appreciate you sharing that. So it sounds like you guys kind of got involved with family and we're doing a lot more just, you know, recreational boating for many years. What happened to bring you back into the exploration and wreck hunting?
Adventure and exploration. We missed it, right, Joe?
Yeah, we'd sat around at happy hour and discussed how that we missed the adventure part of shipwrecks, the research part and the searching and the documentation. And we thought, well, hey, we're in the mid 60s. It's cool to do that again, but we're getting a little long in the tooth to be deep diving anymore. So Mark and I discussed if we were going to do it, we'd have to have a good side scan sonar, and we'd have to have an ROV and get good enough that we could get some good video with it. So we started into the research. Mark found Deep Vision, their side scan sonar on there, and I got online and read Jim Kennard's review of that, and was also very impressed with the scans that he was able to get with it. And we talked to UFA at the factory and just got very comfortable with that company and decided, well, let's go ahead. And Mark and I have been splitting this stuff. So our first big purchase was was the side scan sonar. And then I think the next winter we got the ROV. We've been modifying that thing right along. I think we're on our third summer with that. But anybody that's done much ROVing knows that the built-in lights that are part of the housing are almost useless for getting good video with. The backscatter from the lights, it just wrecks it. So we built those 2 light holders for the ROV and bought 2 Caldan lights. And boy, that thing lights up the whole back end of the Shipwreck. It's really impressive. And the backscatter's gone. We wanted to be real careful with water resistance, so we used solid fiberglass rods to mount the lights on. And we had to, if you're going to do that, you have to have your sub balanced separately from your lights, because you want to be able to run with the lights on the unit or off. So we balanced them separately so that it doesn't change the buoyancy of the sub. And surprisingly, you would think that having those lights that far apart would make quite a bit of drag, but it's actually made our video a little bit smoother. So Mark, why don't you talk about driving it with those on?
Yeah, we kind of checked that out a little bit later this summer, especially we spent the first part of the summer diving some known deeper wrecks to practice our technique. Anybody that's driven an ROV and tried to get good video, it can be challenging at times, especially if you have current or whatever. So with the upcoming announcements we have, the first dive we made on it, we didn't do it with the side lights. The other thing that we've added to this ROV, notice the red camera housing on top. That's actually an ISOTA GoPro housing. So we're using a GoPro Hero Black and taking video, 4K video with that. It has, the ROV is a Blue Robotics. It has 1080p on board. And the camera can articulate up and down, but you have to rotate the sub side to side to do that. We also have the heavy package on there, so we actually have 8 thrusters on this thing. It's an incredible ROV. Joe and I can't say enough about it. We've had great support from the Blue Robotics people out in California. And it's, with the lights on it, like Joe says, it kind of dampens the movement a little bit, which, you know, if you want to get good video, I think a lot of us tend to go kind of quick, get jerky sometimes, and you want to smooth that out, slow that down a little bit to allow people to take in what they're seeing. And actually the drag, the little bit of drag that the lights create helps with that. So it's been a great unit. Both those units have just been incredible. We've been real happy with their purchases.
So there's a couple other people on here that use deep visions, myself included. I've got a deep vision. John Hansen, one of our members and frequent guests, has also got a deep vision, and I can echo what you say about them. Very good resolution and really, really good bang for the buck. The software is solid, and UFA is excellent about providing support there from Sweden. Man, if you followed me at all, the people who follow me have seen my side scan imagery that I've posted over the years. It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
It sure sold us, Brendan. We
Yeah.
couldn't wait at that point.
So, guys, it sounds like you've got some newer boats too that you're working with, not the old, the old Owens.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
new old boats, I guess. Joe bought his first. The boat I had before was a Cruiser's 34 footer, 10.5 foot beam, twin inboards, and it was a great boat, but it started to get a little small, and with some of the stuff we were trying to do. So Joe bought his first. He bought a 1990 Sea Ray, used one obviously at that point, and pretty much went through it stem to stern. Refurbishing things, replacing things, put new engines in it, all kinds of stuff. So I came behind him, and I was so impressed with the model, plus his learning curve shortened mine. And so I pretty much did the same thing, gutted the interior almost, redid everything, rebuilt the engines, kind of went through it again that same way and set it up for what we're doing now. And so they've been really good platforms for the type of work that we're doing.
Very cool. Yeah, they look like excellent wreck hunting platforms. Pretty spacious. A lot of the kind of amenities that you'd really want. So let me forward a little bit here to some of the stuff. So this is your configuration on the boat. You've got the Blue Robotics out, and this is kind of how you search, and that's you guys in action.
Yep, doing a little side scan work here. Joe's kind of our side scan expert. I'm the guy that hauls line in and out. So we can each, operate the ROV or do the side scan, but we kind of tend to specialize a little bit, get a little bit deeper into it. So it's, we work really well as a team. We know what to do. We've been around each other so much that a lot of times you don't even have to say anything. We're kind of thinking along the same lines. What you see in the front there with the red handles is actually a vacuum tester. You pull a vacuum on the battery housing after you've changed the batteries to make sure your O-ring seals are still good. And you make sure it holds a certain amount of vacuum for a certain amount of time before you put it in the water. We have kind of affectionately named it Little Blue. So, we tell Little Blue to go down and check it out, and it's really neat. The thing I noticed when we first started using this, the first time we went out and used it, we dove 3 different wrecks within a matter of hours. And I kept thinking like a diver, thinking, oh, I got to get geared up again. What's my surface interval? It was really weird. It's kind of like muscle memory. You think dive, and, oh, I'm going to get cold again. I'm going to do this. But you don't. You go down below, you've got a 40-inch 4K TV that you view what the sub is seeing, and you operate it from there with a controller. You can sit back, have a pop or something if you want to while you're doing it. It's just a really neat way to be able to see a wreck.
I like your video game controller.
It's actually an Xbox controller, believe it or not.
Yeah,
wireless one.
Very cool. So, guys, part of the hype that I've been throwing around about this show is to talk about some new discoveries. And, there's some really impressive vessels that I knew about and had been researching a little bit. They weren't they weren't new to me. Many of you know that Bernie Hellstrom found the Peshtigo and the St. Andrews off of Beaver Island last year. And it got me thinking about what is the wreck that, we had been calling the St. Andrews. And so I did a big survey of the wrecks over there on the other side of Lower Michigan on Lake Huron. And there's a lot of ships over there that haven't been found in that area, as you guys well know.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what got you interested in looking over there, and take us right into what happened this year and the discoveries?
Well, Joe and I were talking about, okay, so where are we going to go look? You know, what are we going to look for? I had a number of files that I created years ago, back in the very early 80s. I had some time and I, did a lot of research. And so I had a number of different things. So we started going through it and I kept telling Joe, I said, back in the late 70s when I was an instructor, a friend of mine in Rogers City, Steve Kroll, took me out to Spectacle Reef, which is about 12 miles east of Sheboygan, Michigan, and Lake Huron, kind of to the east of Bois Blanc Island. And we dove out there on a fairly shallow wreck. I think it started in about 40 feet on the side of the reef. And Steve had found it, I believe, by sledding. And when he did that, the presumptive identification was the schooner Kate Hayes, which was wrecked in 1856. And there were some other things we found on the bottom. I don't want to get into all the little stuff, but I started researching that area more and started to realize that there was quite a history there. First of all, there's a lighthouse there, which was an engineering marvel about how they made that. But the things that led up to building that lighthouse were a number of accidents that occurred in the 1860s timeframe. So after the Kate Hayes, there was another ship called the Augustus Handy that hit the reef in 1861, bounded over the reef, and then floated away and sunk off in deep water. In 1866, the schooner Asia hit the reef and went to pieces. 1867, there were two ships that were grounded on that reef in the same storm, the Annie Vogt and the R.G. Winslow. And the Annie Vogt was salvaged. I did find some very good information, so it stayed on the lakes. But the R.G. Winslow, the stern broke off and ended up at Presqu'île. So its bones are laying out there somewhere too. In 1869, a schooner called the Nightingale hit the reef and went to pieces. And that one was kind of significant because after all these wrecks, they used this as justification to get funding to build a lighthouse out there to prevent further wrecks. So in 1871, they started construction on the Spectacle Reef Lighthouse. But there was a problem. The wreck of the Nightingale was right on the spot where the engineers wanted to build the lighthouse. So if you look at some references, for example, Chuck Feltner did a little research on that, and what he found was some accounts that said that they cut it up into pieces and then took it out into deep water and sunk it. And that's how they cleared the reef so they could start building the lighthouse. So in going through these wrecks, most of them were broken up on the reef. They're probably, boards on the bottom, in shallower water and stuff like that. But the one that intrigued us was the Augustus Handy because it had bounded over the reef, gone out into deep water, and then sunk. So there was, a good potential that maybe that wreck was still fairly intact. There was another tragedy out there that occurred in the 1950s, I believe it was. There was a Piper supercruiser that an Air Force pilot was flying over the lake in the winter, and his engine stalled out, and he had to land on the water about a mile from the lighthouse. It's a long story, real sad one too. He had to break into the lighthouse, and he stayed there for a while, but then he tried to walk to land and was never seen again. So that plane was out there as well. So that was another potential target. So Joe and I talked about this. We set up Search Grid based on our research and our information and started going at it. And from here, I'm going to let Joe take it because he was doing a lot of the searching as I was checking out the reef with my through-hull camera.
Well, we got out there the first afternoon. We didn't get out there until after lunch, and we started mowing the lawn. We made the mistake this first trip of not bringing the ROV with us. We just thought we'd go search. So we didn't find anything that day. The next morning, we headed out there about 6 o'clock. On the second line, we ran right over it with the down scan. And the wreck showed up on either side of the side scan. So I ran right over it with the boat. So I knew we had something. We waited until the next week to come and check it out. And then we went and got hooked up and started to dive it. Can't really get into the depth at this point, but one of the unique things about this wreck, notice the trail on that side scan image. See the two wakes behind the boat? That is because what they did with the Nightingale, they showed up, that salvager showed up, and part of getting that wreck off the reef, they ripped part of the deck off, they took all the rigging off, they pulled the anchors, the chain, anything that was any use, they stripped it. And then they got in there with a suction dredge and they cleaned the iron ore out of the hull right down to the bottom. And then what they did, which was really odd, they hooked the wrecking tug up to the stern of the Nightingale and they drug it off the reef. And that's the track coming down the slope of being drugged down that slope. And it's just amazing to me that they could do that.
That's astounding. That it literally plowed its way down the side, and it's still showing after 160 years, that trench.
Yeah, we actually went out with the ROV. The bow is pointing kind of up and to the right, so that's the direction of the bow. They pulled it by the stern, as Joe said, and I took the ROV and kind of went out there, and you can kind of see a groove and kind of a pile up of rocks and debris on either side. So when I first told Brendan this, I think he thought I was crazy. But then we showed him an image, and he kind of went, "Oh, they dragged that thing off the reef." It's hard to believe, but that's our theory anyway.
I didn't think it would just sink like that, but apparently the stern must have really been waterlogged to just drag its way down there. So tell us a little bit about what we're seeing here in the pictures, and then we'll play some video.
This is a still shot of the bow on the port side. Obviously, there is some intactness to the bow, although it's leaning quite a bit to the port, kind of heaved up a little bit. I didn't include a picture of the other side, but you'll see skid plates on the shoulders of the bow. It looks like it was built as a real utility, high efficiency canaler for the Welland Canal. Very plumb bow, straight up and down, very flat bottom. In fact, if you look at the stern of it, you'll be able to see that there's really sharp corners on it. The other odd thing that we looked at, and actually I've talked to Caitlin Zant over in Wisconsin, they're the archaeologist, about this. I showed her some of this video, and you can see there's two loading ports there. It looks like for the stern, the big holes, you can see the railing at the top, but then there's these big square holes, and she pointed out to me that those are probably loading ports to load lumber and different things in through the back. But you can see the wheels missing. You can see the framing for where the little housing over the steering gear was, and the deck in the back there is pretty intact.
Well, let's take a look at some video and see if let's see if I can get this to play. And this is the video of the Nightingale. You can hear the ROV running.
Yeah, I didn't strip the audio off that yet, sorry.
I think that is it. Just a view of the bow there. And I've got a couple other videos that are a little shorter here. Let's see if I can bring the next one up. Pause that. Here's one of the stern.
That's kind of real jerky, Brendan.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's kind of what we get on the video sometimes. Hold on. All right. And then this is the last one. I think this shows some of the cargo.
Yeah, we kind of went down through the middle. The right side of the wreck is folded in, and the port side is folded out. And then what you're seeing there is some of the iron ore cargo right in the middle. There was a little bit left in there that they didn't get out, and it looks very much to us like iron ore. There really wouldn't be any other reason to have rocks in the middle of the ship like that I can think of. So that, and the Nightingale was carrying iron ore. So that's just one more thing that makes us think that it is the Nightingale.
Makes sense, definitely. So tell us the rest of the story. So the Nightingale was not what you were looking for. What happened next?
Actually, we were kind of disappointed. we were disappointed. I mean, we found a new wreck, but it was been stripped. I mean, they took everything off of that you could get. So we were, it was cool to find it, but we weren't quite done. We didn't really find what we wanted. So on the way back from a trip to investigate a couple of different wrecks, we decided to stop back by Spectacle Reef. Mark went to the Newell Eddy, and he and Dawn were going to get some more 4K video on that wreck. And they were over there doing that, and I went out and continued the search group or search grid with Nancy. And Mark got his dive done, got through with lunch, and he was just done eating his lunch, and I called him on the phone and said, "We got another one." And then the way I did it back then, it's the way I do it anyway, is if I tow the sonar by something, I finish the line before I go back and do a close-in scan. So I was sure that we had something. It was an end. That first pass by it was a end-on shot at about 500 feet out. And you could tell that there was something there, but you couldn't really get a good clear picture of it. So at the end of that line, I says, "Mark, I'm sure we've got something." And then I turned around and towed it by east-west. And sure enough, there it is. There's a two-masted schooner sitting there on the bottom. And it's darn near perfectly intact. So wow. We were very excited at that point.
Look at the shadow it casts. It's just standing right up there.
We can even see the gaps in the rail on the shadow. That's a wonderful sonar for the money.
It's a beautiful image. So when you went down, did you know right away what it was?
Well, we measured the length and the width, and it fit for the handy. So we didn't know for sure until we got down there and took a peek. We were also interested in these three targets on the bottom off the stern. That farthest one's about 450 foot away. And eventually we did go out there and drop the sub on those. And they're just big rocks on the bottom. But you never know whether it's part of the debris from the wreck or not. So Mark and Dawn came over. We dropped the hook, and down we went. So take it from there, Marcus.
Okay. So before we go on, you sent me this picture. This is the namesake of the vessel, Augustus Handy. And an interesting little story about this. You guys sent me this, and we looked it up. I started to research this guy a little bit, and he's got a real interesting connection to a Wisconsin wreck here. I did not know who Augustus Handy was, and I really had to dig because he wasn't a famous guy. It turns out his brother was sort of the famous guy that got the ship named after him, Truman P. Handy, T.P. Handy, as he was known. And we have a pretty famous wreck over here in Wisconsin, the T.P. Handy that wrecked at Kenosha in 1860. And it turns out that Truman Handy was a major financial guy in Cleveland in the 1850s and 60s and named the vessel after his brother, Augustus. And then I found him on the census. He shows in 1880 as being paralyzed. And the suspicion is that perhaps the reason why you hear about his brother and not so much about him is that he was paralyzed during the Civil War and didn't go on to perhaps as much of an illustrious career as his brother Truman did. But the namesake for the vessel. Any other information on that, guys?
No, not really on Augustus.
Actually, Brandon, you dug out a lot more than we did, and that was we were wondering because we started to dig into the information at Cleveland, and we couldn't get very far without paying them. So we just kind of left it at that for the time being. So thank you very much for digging out that information about his brother, because that adds intrigue to the story.
In a genealogical database, I found it, but I really thought that was I had never researched Truman Handy, so very interesting. Anyway, so when you got down there, tell us about it.
Well, you can see, we aren't going to do it this way in the future, but we kind of went back to our old ways of trying to grapple the wreck. You can actually see the grapple line hanging off the transom there and laying on the bottom. It was such a calm day. We were very lucky this summer. We had 3 or 4 trips of just some incredible weather out there, very calm. That hook never moved. It just laid there. So anyway, as it came down the line with the ROV, and we're all watching this on the TV, well, some of them are tending the tether, but finally I called Joe down. I said, Joe, you got to see this. And Don handled the tether. As I came down on the stern, all of a sudden the wheel came in view. And that was just very heartening after our disappointment with the Nightingale. We didn't know for sure from the side scan if the masts were standing or not. Obviously, you can see from the pictures, the main mast is off to the port, but it's suspended off the bottom. You can also see a boom there kind of sticking up. So you can tell it was a fore and aft rig schooner. You can kind of see the frame in the background there where the cabin was, and of course the wheels beyond that. There's a deck hatch laying off to the right. The cabin is blown off, but down in the port forward quarter of that cabin is a cook stove. You can see it there. And then it looks like the roof to the cabin may have fallen down into the cabin space. So there's probably a lot of artifacts and things like that underneath that roof. All the dead eyes are there. You can see when the main mast fell down here, it disrupted the deck pretty good. But really that is the only damage to the wreck or the mast down. The hull is incredibly intact for 1861. It was rope rigged because you don't see any wire rigging anywhere. It has an intact cross tree on the main mast. And then we started looking at some other portions of it. According to the enrollments, it's supposed to have a figurehead and a square stern. On the head of the ship, there's a good shot right there. If you could pause for a second, you see it's got a really beautiful cutwater bow. It's not like the later canalers. I think it was built to go through the canal because the trip that it was lost on, it was going from Chicago to Kingston, Ontario. So it had to go through the Welland Canal. It's 126 feet long, and as I've learned from some of the Wisconsin archaeologists, they did a great presentation on canalers. This is one of the early ones, not one of them that were really maximized to get the most amount of cargo through there, but the bowsprit's there, and it looks like there's some carving on there. And then also there's supposed to be maybe some scroll work on the stem. Both anchors are in place. Jib boom's broken off, laying on the bottom. But really the hull is completely intact. It's incredible.
It is in amazing shape. And I love that wheel.
It's a wood wheel. I mean, you can tell. It's I doubt very much it's steel, especially being from that vintage. And it's just perfect, in perfect shape. You also notice on that picture right there, if you look just beyond the cabin on the starboard side, you notice that the railing has kind of a larger hole in it. We think those were loading ports as well, if they were going to carry a lumber cargo. But this was really, I think, originally made for the grain trade. It was really booming back at that period of time. They were trying to get grain to the eastern cities. And this one was supposed to be carrying 16,000 bushels of corn when it went down. And you can actually see cargo down in the holds.
So this seems like a pretty early vessel. What year was she built? Was she early 1850s?
1855 she was built, and she went down in 61. In fact, she went down less than a month after they fired on Fort Sumter, which started the Civil War. So that kind of puts it in context for you.
And also a pretty new vessel. That's probably why she's held up so well. She didn't have too many seasons on her when she sank.
No, she was built by Quayle and Martin in Cleveland. And anybody knows anything about Quayle and Martin, they made some incredible wood boats. I don't think they ever made any iron or steel boats or anything like that. When that started coming on, I think they kind of went out of business. But from what I've read, there's a number of different wooden vessels that they made. And I just, it's got a neat rake back stern. The other thing we noticed on it too is that the rudder is hard to port. And we wondered, they were running in some sort of rough weather, maybe a gale, and maybe they saw that reef at the last minute and tried to turn, but the centerboard was probably extended. So we're also suspicious that that may have caused some of the damage up in the mid-deck area when that pounded over the reef. Don't know for sure, but it's fun to speculate.
So shall we look at some video?
Yeah, if it'll play.
It'll play, just not, let's see. Whoa, it crashed.
Oops.
Whoops.
Yeah, it's 4K video, so it's a lot of data.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit more. I think we can, I don't think we're going to get it back up, guys. Can you tell us a little bit more about what the plans are for the ship and for the wrecks, and where they are, and some of the future, what the future might have in store?
Yeah, Joe and I, are really committed to the preservation of wrecks and the historical interpretation of them. We see the Great Lakes as a very unique place. I mean, there aren't too many places in the world that you can see an intact schooner like that from 1861. And so we contacted our state archaeologist here in Michigan, Wayne Lusardi, and we told him about the discoveries, talked about what the possibilities were for preservation, because this is in the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. So obviously it's protected. We love sharing this stuff with people. That's one reason we're on your program tonight. And so what we talked to Wayne about was the possibility of mooring the wreck to allow people to dive it and giving out the location eventually. Wayne and the people from the National Marine Sanctuary would like to do a site evaluation first. With the crazy world we're living in right now, they can't promise that they're going to have the moorings out right away, but they're going to make a great effort to do that. And so it's been a really good collaboration with them. Wayne's been very helpful, very interested in what we're doing. So we'll be working with him some more early next year.
Very exciting. I can't wait to hear more about this and to learn more about what the underwater archaeology of those sites reveals, because they're two really historic and interesting wrecks that tell a really important story about trans-lake commerce during the antebellum and Civil War period.
Right.
So, guys, I think a couple of things I want to do before we wrap up here. Anything else you guys, feel like we need to cover before we move on and do some housekeeping?
We're probably going to do one more trip out there, Brendan. We got one more video trip to make to the Handy, and then we'll probably be done with it. And we'll let the Lusardi decide when to release the wrecks, but they will be released. We're not trying to hide it from anybody. We'll be on to other stuff.
Yeah, and we will be making a larger video kind of the Spectacle Reef area. It's going to be a more extensive video, and it will play. This is still some raw footage that we were trying to pull together for this interview. We weren't quite ready to do it in big style, but we will get that out on YouTube and notify the group when it's out there, so you can see it, because it really is an incredible wreck. I know everybody feels that way when they find a wreck, but we've dove a lot of schooners, and this one is just so cool because of the vintage and the intactness, and I think there's a lot we can learn from it, and I know Wayne is interested in really evaluating it.
Excellent. So I want to let everybody know that we are going to have a Zoom room, and for those of you who didn't get to see the video, I am going to try to play the video in our Zoom room. What would happen is I had it embedded in a PowerPoint, and when I tried to play it, basically PowerPoint crashed because it said, I'm out of memory. So we're going to show it in the Zoom room. So in 20 minutes, do join us in the Zoom room that's on the screen. If you have any questions for Mark and Joe, they're going to be there. I already see one. Which 2 ships were found? A late joiner, the Augustus Handy and the Nightingale were found at Spectacle Reef, for those of you who joined late. All right. So thanks so much, guys. It's been a great hour. I really appreciate you coming on the show and letting us all in the community here get to know you a little bit better, and telling the story about this really fascinating find and how you guys have ramped up and kind of come back into the wreck hunting community. It's a great story in and of itself. For those of you who are wondering about next week, I am going to have Kim Stabelfelt on. You'll recall that he was going to be our guest 2 weeks ago, but his workstation crashed and he was unable to join us. So Kim Stabelfelt, the Milwaukee diver, underwater archaeologist, longtime activist in the Great Lakes shipwreck diving community. So please join us for Kim Stabelfelt next week. And a big thank you again to Mark and Joe. We will be in the Zoom room at 8:20 Central, 9:20 Eastern. Grab yourself a beverage, go use the restroom, and feel free to join us. I will try to show the video there. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, guys.